All right, we are now recording to the cloud. Welcome to Museums and Change, and thank you all for joining us today. Special thanks to Heather Nice for presenting today at the very moment that America celebrates its 250th anniversary. Our national narratives are under attack by unprincipled, uninformed, and corrupt politicians. This situation becomes even more egregious given an obvious need for better historical and civic education in our schools at all levels. Colleagues have proposed that all museums need to see themselves as civic museums. I have suggested that all museums need to see themselves as environmental museums. Today's session is the first of four that will argue that all kinds of museums need to be history museums, even if this challenges our current professional mindsets and practices. A few housekeeping details. The session is being recorded. We will make a link available via the AAM Open Forum ASAP. Unless you are recognized to speak, please hit your mute button so we don't get noise pollution during the session. If you want or need captioning, please activate captions on your Zoom dashboard. They are available. If you want to raise a question or make a comment, please use the raised hand signal on your dashboard. You will go into a queue and I will recognize you as quickly as possible. Do use the chat function to make comments, pose questions, enter citations of relevant literature and so on. And that way we can manage a second parallel conversation. If you want to be added to our email list to receive direct notices of future sessions, please enter your name and email address in the chat or write to me directly via email. We'll happily add you to our list. Our next session will convene on January 22nd, 2 weeks from today, when two-time Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Alan Taylor will discuss the need for more complete and complex narratives about our nation's history. Please join us then. I am speaking to you from Philadelphia, where I live on the ancestral lands of the Lenni Lenape, and where the Lenni Lenape still reside. I believe it is our responsibility to learn about the indigenous peoples who lived here before us and to share our knowledge with our colleagues, constituents, and clients. Without further ado, Heather, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Just give me 1 second to set my tech up so I can see all of you and the chat box. Cool. Thank you so much for having me here today. I am here to talk about building an education outreach strategy for America's 250th. Now, I do want to start by prefacing that for Colonial Williamsburg, 2026 is both the nation's 250th anniversary as well as our 100th anniversary, as we were founded as a legacy project for the 150th via the efforts of Reverend W.A.R. Goodwin and John D. Rockefeller Jr. and Abby Aldrich Rockefeller. So, to that end, Colonial Williamsburg built a multi-year strategic plan for 2026 to celebrate both of those anniversaries, and I am going to put it in the chat box for you to see. It included convenings like A Common Cause to All that went across the last 3 years. It championed major changes on site, including the construction of new buildings such as the Bray School, the African Baptist Meeting House, and state-of-the-art archaeology center. And it also really led to a rethinking of our digital engagement to think about how we increase our reach in this pivotal year. And so I do want to caveat that my department is one of many departments that are working on our 2026 outreach projects. And so our focus is specifically on building digital content for general and K-12 audiences. And so what I plan on focusing on is sharing a quick dive, because I was told I have 25 to 30 minutes at most, a quick dive into history.org, where I will show you a legacy project that we are building for the 250th. And then I'll summarize with some of the lessons learned that I think are very applicable to institutions that are thinking about what they'd like to do in 2026. If at any point you have questions, let me know. I know this is going to go fast. So if some of you are like, I didn't get enough, I want to have a follow-up conversation, I do want to say I'm happy to do that. So let's dive in. So for decades, teachers have been telling Colonial Williamsburg, as well as museums, that they really want one place where they can find our collective assets. And so CW was thinking, as we're talking about our strategic plans, our senior VP of education, Mia Nagawicki, discovered that Colonial Williamsburg held the domain history.org and was doing nothing with it. And so she proposed, could we use this to create a solution to the problem as part of our 2026 efforts by convening a consortium of partners to build and test a site that shared our resources with vetted contextualized materials in one location? So, to deeply understand teacher needs and ensure a project like History.org could address them, we started with a deep 15-month dive into data. This began with the review of existing literature. On the screen, you can see some of the realities of K-12 history and civics landscape as reported by a variety of institutions. Some of the trends that we saw were that students' scores in history and civics are at an all-time low. Students aren't reading at grade level, and even though early instruction in social studies has been shown to improve both civics and literacy outcomes, instructional time for social studies has been reduced over the past 25 years. Further, we see that experienced teachers are leaving the profession post-COVID, and teachers are indicating that either they don't have access to textbooks or they have outdated textbooks. I think one teacher told us that the last historical topic that was covered was the election of Clinton in their textbook. And so, given this kind of dearth of relevant materials, roughly 85% of teachers are reporting that they are using materials that they design and write themselves to teach their students. Yet we know, based on our experiences as museum educators and iCivics' analysis of NAEP data, that the use of primary source materials in the classroom correlates to measurable impacts and improvements in student scores. One of the quotes that really stuck with our team in particular, you can see on the screen, I could be a better teacher if I could have some direction instead of creating everything myself. And so that really for us was like, oh boy, moment. This really is something. And so based on our lit review, we knew there was a problem that we could potentially address. And so we hired Brand Federation and Wondrous Consulting to complete a novel national research study. We talked to 995 educators and then did follow-up focus groups to really understand the needs of teachers across the country and answer three key questions. And before I talk about those questions, I do want to say we were very intentional when we put those groups together in ensuring that we had diversity across type of school, type of area that you lived in, so regional, whether it was urban, suburban, rural. We talked to teachers with varying levels of experience, different demographics. Like we really wanted to be sure that when we talk to teachers, we weren't getting what we call our super users, right? The teachers that are going to come to us regardless of what we build because they're interested and they're engaged. We wanted to talk to your average classroom teacher to understand what they needed. And so our three key guiding questions for the research were, what problems can history.org solve for teachers? For whom will it solve those problems? Which teachers are likely to be most receptive to having these challenges solved? Which teachers have the highest need for what we can offer? And then, of course, how can it do so in ways that differentiate it from what's currently available? And so you can see on the screen kind of a brief summary of the answers that we received. But what those answers did for us is really demonstrate that there was strong potential for history.org to succeed. And that, of course, encouraged us to proceed with design and development stages. So over the next year, we convened a team of partners and built a closed beta version of history.org with a mission to empower teachers with top-tier educational assets, spark curiosity in history and civics, meet diverse learners' needs, and cultivate an engaged citizenry. So, as with any project of this magnitude, we understood that the strength and power of collaboration and building an effective team was vital to completing the work. And so, in addition to partnering with museums and national civics education organizations, the History.org team includes active classroom teachers, academic and public historians, and experts across the fields of education, research, design, and user experience. So together, we've set a very ambitious goal to reach all 55 million students in the United States and positively affect history and civics instruction. And I did want to pause here for a second to say, while Colonial Williamsburg is leading the charge to design history.org, we do see history.org as a project that is a field-wide initiative that relies heavily on an engaged consortium of partners and a collaborative design process. So our partners, whether the museums, the teachers, or the field experts, are absolutely critical to the success of the project. And so now what I'd like to do is do a quick walkthrough of history.org and let you see it. So I'm going to pull up and let's make sure this works. Can everybody see history.org? Perfect. So I'm going to do some very quick highlights. Again, I know this is not a deep dive, and if you are interested in partnering with us on this, we do much deeper dives on those. But on our main page, we really wanted to make sure that we highlighted who our target audience is. And so we created history.org first and foremost for teachers. And so if you scroll down, you'll be able to see the first 3 pages. You aren't able to see everything because we are still in closed beta, which I'll talk about more in a second, but you are able to see the first 3 pages I'll share. So we really wanted to highlight who we're talking to, that teachers are our target audience, that we're working with museums across the country who are trusted providers of information. And we're also talking very quickly about what it is we're doing. So we're providing access to assets. And so you are able to click into these 6 assets to see kind of the template and the framework that we've built around the site. But I will show you some things that you can't see. And so again, this first page is really just about setting the stage of who we are and what it is we're trying to accomplish. Then if you go to About Us, this is where we really establish who we are as a group and what our core values are. And so you can see we stay up front. A thriving democracy starts in the classroom. Like, we are making no bones about the fact that we believe civics instruction has to come and history instruction has to come from the classroom, and it's vital to what our citizenry need. And so you can see our mission, which I told you earlier. And then as you scroll down, we have our core values. So we really do highlight the importance of a complete story of the past told from many perspectives. We think resources need to be relevant, rigorous, and results driven. We are leaning into the expertise of our partners. We believe curiosity is a path to deep engagement, and we want content that connects every learner to the past. We also talk about the different museums, again, that are part of this organization and that are working with us on towards this. And then we talk about how people can get involved. On our partner page, we really do lean in on the credibility of our partners, because one of the things that we understand in this current environment is teachers need to know who we're creating the content they're using in the classroom, and they need to be able to talk about the credibility of that content. And so we start up front really highlighting that we are working with leading civic education organizations, leading museums, to really ensure that we have the credible content that teachers can use. And so we highlight our steering committee up front. We highlight the teachers who've worked on the project with us. We include our inaugural partners, which were the group that came with us early on when we had this crazy idea. And then we've added our new partners. We do have more partners that are on here. We're currently in the process of adding content to the site. And as we add content, their logos will show up. And then, of course, we credit the design team, the group that is working with us to develop the site. And so what we're trying to accomplish with the site is really to create a comprehensive K-12 resource for history and civics education. And so to do that, we've put in a navigation bar that allows teachers to search by historical period, by civic topic, by grade, but also we have a library where they can just go explore our assets. And so if you were to click on the American Revolution in that menu, it very quickly highlights for you that we have collections, we have targeted videos, we have 64 primary sources, and a learning experience. We also highlight the contributing partners because, again, we want to establish credibility early and show who's involved and who's helping support this process. And so as teachers scroll down, they can see collections of assets. So the way that we're looking at collections is they're typically around a topic that a teacher might have to teach, and we bring both videos and sources in conversation with each other. And so really highlighting the importance of looking at assets across our collections, but we also provide videos for context to ensure that teachers and their students have everything they need to be able to approach those sources at the same entree level. And so as you scroll down, you can see additional collections. You can view more. We have videos that have been created explicitly for the site. They're targeted to different grade bands. So you can see we have some that are targeted to K2, some for 9 through 12, and everything on the site is color coded so teachers can very quickly find what it is they need. And we also provide primary sources for teachers. And so you can see again, and then that learning experience at the bottom. So this just very quickly lets them see what's available. For our civics topics, I pulled participation and deliberation, so civic virtues and democratic principles. So you can see here we have 2 collections, 11 videos, 4 primary sources. You can see the groups that have been involved. Our collections include things like civic virtues, foundations of citizenship. And of course, we are going to add more. This is just our beta version, so it's our test case of the site. But we have videos relating to civic virtues, courage, respect, empathy, honesty, service, at grade level appropriate language so that teachers can engage their students in these topics. So once a teacher clicks into a collection, what they find is a very similar pattern, right? Like they can see how many videos there are, how many sources, how many vocabulary words, the partners that were involved. And so this collection I chose because it is a historical skill collection, but is deeply steeped in civic understanding. And so this one really helps teachers talk to their students about how they can learn to think historically. And so as you scroll down, you see conversation, context. Why is it important that we learn to think historically? We provide compelling questions as well as educational videos that include what is history? How is it constructed? Who constructs it? To really ensure that students understand disciplinary practice, which is really important when it comes to talking about who's telling you the history you're reading and what do they know. And so then as we scroll down, you can see we've got primary sources related to this, and the questions really dig in both to the asset as well as to disciplinary practice, because we want to ensure that students understand how we historians and we museums approach the past so that they can then replicate those patterns in their own lives when they're thinking about sources and information that they encounter. And then, of course, we provide vocabulary words for struggling readers that provide both a definition as well as a sample sentence. And then we can create connections. And so a teacher can say, oh, I was really interested in children and youth and how they were covered here. And so you can click on children and youth, and it will actually redirect you to the library where it limits all of the sources that we have tagged children and youth. And so they can very quickly find other assets that might be of interest to them. Another thing I mentioned is our educational videos. I'm not going to play it, but we really thought about these as a way to level set both for teachers and for students. So oftentimes, particularly at the K-5 level, you may only teach a topic once every year. And so if I'm a teacher who's preparing and I'm like, man, I've got to teach the Boston Tea Party, but I haven't talked about it in a year, I haven't thought about it in a year, I need some context. The teacher can come in and watch the video and say, is this something I can use with my students? But not only do we provide the video, we provide the ability for them to click here and they can export classroom slides, teacher notes, student handouts. And so as quick as that click and coming here, they now have slides that they can use in their class with have all these questions associated to the video. And so we're really trying to make teachers' lives easier in this work that we're doing. But in addition to the questions, which you can see again listed here, we've worked with historians to vet those questions and provide suggested answers. And so if a teacher's like, I'm not really sure what the answer to this question should be, they can go through every one, and we've provided vetted and suggested responses to those questions. We've done the same thing for artifacts. So here you see we've watched a video about the Boston Tea Party. Then I'm a teacher and I'm looking and I'm like, wow, not only can I talk to my students about the Boston Tea Party, I can show them tea leaves from the event itself. And so the Zoom features on the site are incredible. Like we are actually giving students the ability to get closer to these assets than they would even be able to do in a museum, which is great. And so if you X out of this, when you come down, again, talking about those questions that we have, you can see that we really walk the questions through scaffolding. And so we ask them first to say hello to the source. What do you notice about it? What do you wonder? Then we go through, what do you see inside the bottle? Can you make out the words on the label? Imagine you could open it and smell its contents. What do you think it might smell like? So these are grades 3 through 5 questions. So they're a little simpler, but it really does make the students think about, what is this asset I'm looking at? What can I tell about it? But then we use the questions to drive information about the assets itself and to drive the learning. So rather than primary sources becoming the example of the learning, as often happens in the K-12 classroom, teachers can use the sources to drive the acquisition of learning rather than just as an example of something they've already heard about or read about in a textbook. And so you can see here, we really ask students, this is what it says. What does this help you understand about that object? The Boston Tea Party took place on this event. The tea bottle was gathered up the next day. Why do you think someone wanted to save the tea? So we really are walking them through, what are the ways historians might think about this source? And we don't have it up on the site yet, but my favorite asset is actually one. It's a punch bowl randomly from an illegal tavern in Philadelphia. And what's really great is one of the questions we've asked is, how might a museum or historian use this punch bowl to interpret the lives of the tavern owners, the lives of the patrons who might have drunk punch from this punch bowl, the lives of the enslaved African Americans who were responsible for serving and managing using this punch bowl. We also ask questions about, this punch would have included ingredients, which allows us to bring in the triangle trade. And so we really are looking at these objects, not just at surface value, but really trying to, through the questions, demonstrate the number of stories that a single object can hold for students. And so I did show you the library earlier, but I'm going to take off the filter. So you can see that we provide a variety of filters for teachers to access information. So they can look at grade bands, they can look at format, they can search by civic topics, they can search by historical periods, they can search by people who've been tagged in the library. And so it really does give teachers the affordances of a catalog to search very quickly. And so the goal for the site is essentially to create I often refer to when I'm talking to teachers as a pear-shaped resource. It's very narrow on top and they can find exactly what they're looking for, but it has a big back end where they can find additional sources when they decide they want to find something new to teach with. So I understand that as a really quick overview of the site. We often spend like 30 to 40 minutes just looking at the site. So I do apologize for how quick that went. But I do want to give you some status. So we are currently in closed beta, which means we've opened the site to approximately 1,000 users by invitation, but we do plan to launch our first public release this summer. We will still be in beta at that point. It will just be open beta. We will have enough content when we launch that a teacher at each grade band will be able to use a new asset every day of the year. But at that point, we'll have approximately 20% of our anticipated 200 collections done. So this is going to be a long-term project. We do plan on continuing to build out the site, and we do see it as an ongoing, continuously updated legacy project for America's 250th that we hope will grow into future iterations. So there may be a state.history.org, there may be a worldhistory.history.org, there may be a kids version of the site. So we really are thinking about this as a permanent project that benefits the field and really does let us engage teachers and students in ways that we haven't traditionally been able to in the past. So using that as an example and knowing that we're all thinking about what ideas we can do for the 250th, I wanted to summarize the steps that we took for history.org as well as share resources that I think everybody on the call might find useful. Each of these steps can be taken alone or done in concert to flexibly allow you to do as much or as little as your plans, your budget, your staffing may allow. As I share resources, if you're using something that I don't share, I highly encourage you to copy and paste it in the chat box so that we can all benefit from it. Because I know some stuff, but I don't come close to knowing everything that's out there. So, step one, I mentioned this earlier, but our journey really did start with data, and we have maintained data as the bedrock of our project. So, when decisions need to be made, when priorities need to be set, we return to the data. If we have new questions, if we don't understand something, we collect more data. We do focus groups with teachers. And we've really been intentional about ensuring that we not only use our data, but that we understand the landscape of the data that exists, and so that we're able to take advantage of what our partner institutions are doing as well. So I linked to stuff on the chat box. I'm going to throw all of those links in there for you. So we really started when we started thinking about history.org, looking at American Academy of Arts and Sciences and Educating for American Democracy, the work that they were already doing to understand history and civics instruction. American Historical Association's American Lesson Plan came out in the middle of our work and we used it. And so the thing with data is you can't just look at it once and assume you have it, right? Like you have to keep going back and seeing what new data is coming back and really looking to see what your peer institutions are doing and internalizing what you can learn from them. So I put a couple questions here if you're thinking about starting with data within your institution. Think about what you're trying to create and then ask yourself, what do I already know about the landscape? What data do we already have? What data do other people have? What should we collect? What novel questions might we ask when we collect that? And how are we collecting data? Data doesn't have to be a huge national novel research study like we did. It could simply be we put a visitor survey up, or when we do a program with teachers, we ask them, what do you really need from us? What's working? What's not working? What are you trying to accomplish in the 250th and how can we support you? And then really thinking through what are problems that your target audience is experiencing. And so obviously with us, there was a lot of data out there about the concerns that are popping up in K-12 history and civics education. We had years of NAEP data that we could pull to show it's not getting better. And so realistically, there's a lot of data out there. So don't come into this thinking you have to be the one that runs the study. think about what's already out there and what you can take advantage of. The second thing we did is we really leveraged our strengths. So when it came to history.org, we had to ask to determine if we had the convening power and if we had the resources to complete a project of this magnitude and ensure that it aligned with our institutional goals. And so on the screen again, you'll see questions that will, I hope, help you figure out the strengths that your institution brings to connecting with your audiences in 2026. Um, I will say, particularly for history.org, the fact that we are in line with our institutional goals and our strategic priorities has been huge because this is an expensive project. And knowing that the board and our leadership are behind us really does make a difference in our ability to be able to convene partners and talk to them about all the things that have been put in place to ensure the success of the project. The third step I wanted to share is engaging your partners and your existing networks. We would not be able to do a project the scale of history.org if we hadn't leveraged our partner networks. They have been and continue to be vital to our success, particularly with the scope of what we're trying to accomplish, covering all of K-12 US history and civics, right? Colonial Williamsburg only does a very small part of that. And so we really do need our partners to be successful in this endeavor. Um, that said, it doesn't matter the size of the program you're aiming for, whether it's local or national in scale. I don't think I can understate the importance of talking to your communities, talking to your partners, seeking those collaborations where you can. I'm going to put the links for the networks that are on the screen in the chat, just so you have them. So these are some of the networks that we're a part of and that have really, I think, helped Colonial Williamsburg think about how we're approaching 2026 from an education standpoint. One of the things one of our partners said, I'm going to give her credit on this. Caroline Klibanoff is the director of Made by Us. We were having this convening early, I think it was early 2024, and we tossed all these ideas around about a national convening. We were going to do it on the mall and have this big civics program. And she raises her hand and she's like, doesn't the Smithsonian already do something like this? And it was like, well, yeah. And she's like, why would we reinvent the wheel? It was like, that's a great point. Why would we reinvent the wheel? And so I think a really important part of these conversations has to be what's already happening and where can we become a part of it? Because the reality is, none of us can do big programs on our own. We have to work together. And particularly when you're in an institution where you may be under-resourced or working with a small staff, partnerships become even more important because you can divvy out who's going to do what aspect and what piece, and everybody gets to take advantage of that common work. Of course, I didn't put it in there, but I am going to do, sorry, obvious, this wasn't allowed. I didn't ask in advance. I'm going to do a shameless plug for history.org. So if you're interested in joining history.org or in just staying in the know about what we're doing, I put a document in there where you can fill out a form and just let us know if you want to be a champion, a participant, or just stay in the know. It's really quick. It's only like 3 questions, I promise. Also, if I've missed any groups that you're a part of that you found to be vital to your 2026 planning, please put them in here. The Educating for American Democracy Community Learning Partners Task Force, we meet quarterly. They've been phenomenal in helping us think about how we're all civics museums and how we all should be engaging in civic stories. The Civics Now Coalition is a group that's run by iCivics, where they keep us involved with advocacy work and what's happening in the legislature so that we understand the work that they're doing and how that applies to what's happening at Colonial Williamsburg. We don't engage in advocacy, but it helps us understand what's taking place as iCivics does that work and shares that information with us. And then, of course, American Academy of Arts and Sciences has Our Common Purpose, Civics Renewal Network. Like, there are tons of great organizations out there that are already thinking about this and doing this work, and they have programs that institutions can join. So I highly recommend thinking about that. This is another big one, and really does come in line with the data conversation. It's so important as you do this work to embrace a reflective, iterative design process. So as part of building history.org, we have consistently engaged teachers. They've helped us test new ideas. We've adjusted midstream to ensure that what we're building really does meet their needs and meet our goals. A great example of this, we built our early collections based on data that had been assigned to us, and we got really great feedback from elementary teachers, but they were like, these aren't the most useful sources, and was like, well, tell us more. What does that mean? And so we actually ran focus groups this summer with K-5 educators to say, what do you actually need from us with primary sources? Because not only were we not getting them what they needed, our partners were also telling us they were struggling to understand what to nominate for K-5 audiences. And so we went and did research. We learned more about what K-5 teachers need from primary sources, and we're sharing that with our partners. So it really does become this process that benefits us, but it also benefits those that are coming along the journey with us. And so I think the importance here is, as museums, we want to ensure that the work we're creating is actually useful to our target audience. And I think this step helps ensure that, right? Um, and I know I put it, I've not been reading all the questions, but there is one here I do want to point out. It is so important before you start this work that you talk to your key stakeholders before you start, right? Like as you're starting, you have to engage the communities who you're working with to say, what do you need from us? What do you want? What problems are you facing? Because if you go to them with, here are the answers we're bringing, they might be like, this isn't a problem we have. And then your project doesn't succeed. And so we've really, with history.org, tried to be very clear about who are the audiences we're working with, whose stories are we telling, how are we engaging those groups to ensure that we're telling them the way we need to, and that we're meeting teacher needs in the process. And so the other thing, obviously, is just being open to collecting and responding to feedback. And it doesn't have to be a big survey or a big focus group. It can just be like a quick, how did it go? What could we do better? What would you like to see for future programs? Um, Finally, this is something that I had not heard about before I came to Colonial Williamsburg. So we've really spent a lot of time over the last 2 years maximizing our efforts, really building a layered content strategy. And so if you're not familiar with that term, because I was not familiar with that term, it's essentially building a comprehensive content ecosystem by creating opportunities to connect visitors across the content you're creating to drive future engagement and further engagement. And so, as two examples of this, Uncovering Loyalties is a game that is set in pre-revolutionary Williamsburg. We built it in partnership with iCivics, and it asks students in grades 3 through 5 to think about how different individuals who were children in Williamsburg at the time were either patriot, somewhat loyalist, or loyalist. And so they ask them questions and they rank them on a scale. So we built the game, but then we were like, how else can we keep using this as a tool to drive visitor engagement? So we designed a tour. When parents bring their students or their children on site, they can take the Uncovering Loyalties tour so they can play the game before they come and then actually see the sites that are in the game. They can, if teachers came this summer and played the game and they wanted to be something their students can experience, but they can't bring them to Williamsburg, we built a Google Arts and Culture story that essentially allows students to do 360 tours of the sites that they're playing at in the game so they can see what those buildings look like, even if they can't come boots on ground to Williamsburg. We also do plan to add the game to history.org and connect the historical assets that are mentioned into the game to that page so that teachers can teach the thing and then go take the students to see the teapot that they play and they see during the game. Another example here, we did a Made by Us Civic Seasons event. We did trivia. We hosted a pizza party. We did a gallery walk, and then there was trivia at the end. We built an online quiz that would accompany the trivia. And so, as they were answering questions, if they got an answer wrong, they could link out to web articles that we had written or YouTube videos that we had posted so that they could actually see context around the answers that were correct. We also did follow-up emails where we shared links to our YouTube page and to our Facebook page and to different articles on the website where they could follow up around those key civics topics they had discovered um, during that interaction. And so really it's taking the moments that you have with people to really think about how can we leverage the assets, the collections, the work we've already done and layer it into this new thing that we're creating so we continue to deepen their engagement, deepen their learning, and then spark their curiosity to explore further. So I just threw a whole lot of stuff at you, and I apologize that it's very quick and a lot. So let's talk about it. I'm going to stop sharing. I do have one kind of concluding slide, but I'm going to stop sharing for now so we can open the floor to discussion. So are
Great.
there any big questions you have?
First, first of all, Heather, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation and a tremendous wealth of resources that people can draw on. Really exciting. Uh, I want to call on Gretchen right away. She posted a very powerful question in the chat function. Gretchen, care to throw it out, please?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I live in DC, and so of course a lot of our news has been dominated by the ways in which the White House has been putting a lot of pressure on the Smithsonian and particularly its history-oriented museums. And a recent letter in December was very menacing from the White House regarding how the Smithsonian was planning to present America 250. And so and I've also, through the Substack that I have, Museums Act Together, we've been tracking the pressure, the defunding and censorship that's been going on from state legislatures on both schools and museums regarding how they tell American history. And I think the 250 celebration is going to be really big in this area. So my question is, what kinds of, have you gotten any questions or discussions of concern from the teachers about, I'd love to teach this, but I'm not sure I'm going to be able to? And um, how are you dealing with that? Because to me, the pressure is enormous.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is something that schools and museums really need to be thinking about during this year. So that's my question.
Yeah. Um, so I'm gonna start by saying I can't answer all of that, right? Like I think that is kind of the $1 million question, right? If we could answer it, we would be in a great place. But what I can share, um, we are currently not federally funded in any way. We don't receive any money from the federal government, and so we are not subject to those same, I guess, the same responses that some of the federally funded museums are being receiving. We have not received those. Um, Colonial Williamsburg in general, I think, has always done a very good job of sticking to primary sources and really leaning into source-based history. Um, and going with the original sources. And so one of the things we've done with history.org is we have been very intentional about providing sourcing information for everything we're sharing. So not only are these the museums who hold the original assets of the past sharing these assets, we're sharing them and able to say not only did the museum partner review the content that was written about this asset, but a historian who's independent and works for OAH also reviewed this content. And so we're able to say we've gone through a very intensive review process. Like every piece of information before it ends up on the site has easily been reviewed by at least 10 people. Like we are very, very intentional about the work that we're putting on. So it is a different project in the sense that like a museum partner couldn't say, here's a lesson plan I've built. Can you put it on the site? We're not doing that. And it's not that there's anything wrong with the lesson plans. It's just we have a level of curatorial um, control essentially that our data has indicated as teachers need to know that we can make these guarantees, that the content's been vetted, that we have had multiple review processes that have been gone through, that every time they look at a page, they know where and what they're looking for. Like there's consistency across sources. And so we've been very intentional in how we've designed the site to ensure that they are able to say that. As far as talking to teachers, yeah, I mean, I think all of us are hearing their concerns. Um, but I will say one of the things we've consistently heard is because we are prioritizing who the partners are, who the content is coming from, they feel like they have an amount of coverage or protection to be able to use these assets to teach because they can point back to say, historians have vetted it. It's from these museums that are nationally trusted. So in some senses, we are benefiting from our collective credibility in putting the site together. But because of that, we are also being so intentional about how we build content on the site to ensure that we aren't harming anyone's credibility.
Right.
Gretchen, thank you for the question. Heather, thank you for the response. Um, BJ, you had a comment by way of a question in the chat. Could you jump in, please?
Sure. Well, my comment in the chat is I've got a neighbor, someone who lives in the neighborhood with a big flag over his garage, referring to the 250th, and it has a big byline that says 200 years of freedom. And my question is 200 years of freedom for whom? because obviously we know that that 250 years has not included freedom for blacks, American Indians, certain religious groups, women, and various other demogra demographics. So again, kind of related to Gretchen's question, again, are you focusing again, or again, subcategorizing things so that if people want to find information out about, again, the struggles of these different groups, that will be an easy process?
Yeah, so we only have 16 collections on the site currently, and one of them is The Paradox of Independence, Not Freedom for All. And it very much addresses that while the Declaration of Independence upheld very lofty ideals, the reality of it was not that. Um, so I mean, I think the fact that we thought that it was important enough to prioritize that as one of our first 16 collections indicates where we're coming from as a site. Um, you know, Colonial Williamsburg has always been very intentional about the variety of stories that can be told in our space. We have an active Indigenous history program. We have a very active African American history program. And so that is it's the leadership that's also overseeing this work. And so, telling a complete story of history that is fact-based and source-based has always been something that's been key to Colonial Williamsburg. And we're carrying that forward into history.org. I don't know that I can answer beyond that as far as like what the site is doing, but I think we value and uphold the importance of a complete story of history and an accurate story of history. Even if it means asking the hard questions or looking at tensions. And if you're not familiar with it, EAD has done a really good job educating for American democracy, in their roadmap, which I linked to earlier, has done a really good job of setting forth what are key tensions that we need to consider. And it's important because the work was done with a bipartisan coalition. And so it's really good, I think, at providing a tool for museums who are thinking about how do we step into this contentious space. It provides ways in which you can talk about it. And so some of the ways that we've taken advantage of that framework is, we actually have in the library tensions that you can click on. So civic honesty, reflective patriotism. We don't really think an individual asset can be tagged at a tension level, right? Because you don't really have tension from one thing unless you've got a really compelling story around it. But for our activities and for our collections, if we feel like they give teachers the ability to teach some of those kind of key fundamental tensions to a democracy, we are tagging them as such in the library.
Thank
BJ,
you, and hopefully others on this call will take note of some of your methods.
I frankly, I mean, Avi, I don't know if you traditionally do this, but I think this would be like, what are others of you doing to handle this? Because I think, we're one example. And granted, we're working with a lot of partners, but, I'm sure other institutions are doing things and thinking about this in ways I'd be interested in knowing, right? Because we're doing the work too.
indeed. Thank you for the question. Thank you for the answer. Elaine, I see your hand up.
Hi. Yeah. So I recently graduated my master's program, and my capstone project focused very heavily on museum education that is accessible for learning disabilities. Do you have resources on, say, like adapting your lesson plans to IEPs and stuff like that available? Because when I was working in a school, there was so much focus on like math and ELA for the exceptional learners, but it seemed like social studies was kind of an area where they were really underserved. And definitely that's something I wanted to address with my project.
Yeah. So a couple things. Starting with base level accessibility, we are currently working with our web designer to ensure that everything that's posted to this design site is WCAG 2.0 A plus compliant. For those of you that aren't familiar with that, that's the highest standard of accessibility that exists for digital content currently. Actually, no, it's the second highest standard. Triple A is one that they don't typically hold people to. Like, you're required to be A to be considered accessible. We're going for A plus. or double A, I think is what it's called. But we're working to actually build into the site something that will flag anything as we're building content that isn't that level of accessibility. So I think that's step one. Step two, specifically to your question, when we think about how teachers can differentiate for students on IEPs, I didn't show this to you, but we just launched in December. So teachers are just now finding it as they're coming back to the classrooms. We have given them the ability to fully customize any asset page that will build it into a website where they can control the questions, the language, they can control how their students interact with it. So for instance, if you've got like a 9th through 12th grade class where a student can't have too much text on a screen, the teacher can actually change the page as we've built it to limit how many questions each student sees at a time. So they would only see one question at a time. So they can minimize distractors. And so we really are trying as much as possible to put everything in teachers' hands so that they can meet the needs of the diverse students in their classroom. So that's step one. We are currently, as part of our design for 2026, we've built in a learning support structure. And so we're, as we speak, meeting with teachers, doing research to figure out how can we better meet their needs and as far as supporting students who have learning differences. And so this again goes into how are we meeting their needs where they are? And so we built it first and they said, you know what, we don't have enough learning supports. And so it's like, great, what does that look like? And so we're now doing another round of research to figure out how we meet those needs. And so more to come on that, but we are adamant that the site we build really is accessible to all students, all learners.
Great.
Thank you, Heather. That is awesome. It's so exciting to hear. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah. And I think one of the benefits of the team we put together, having user experience design experts really is helping us with that, right? Like it's not just our team that's working on it. We have people who this is their area of specialty.
Elaine, thank you for the question. Heather, thank you for the response. Emlyn? Emlyn, you're muted. Still muted.
Okay, there we are.
There we go.
Okay, I just got a new system. So I apologize for joining this late, but I was at a related international convening for the last 2 hours on the reimagination of the Ontario Science Centre in Toronto, which some of you may know to have been one of the sort of vanguard science centres alongside the Exploratorium 60 years ago. It's having to reimagine its future because the location it's had in the northeast part of Toronto is now has to be abandoned. It has been abandoned because of structural and safety issues. So this conversation that I was just in involving players from around the world was very germane to what you're talking about. What I want to mention two things. One is I learned of a resource based in Adelaide, Australia, to do with future-orientated museums where science centre leaders, I think this is not just science, it may be, but it probably was still worthwhile looking at, where the participants of this call just now, many of them from, for example, Helsinki and Newcastle in England and Sudbury, Ontario, Canada, and Phoenix, for example, had all participated in the development of experiences under the tutelage of this new sort of think tank in Adelaide, Australia, on future-orientated museums. It might well be worth checking out. But my more general suggestion is that I think, any museum, either in that context or in the US 250 context, has to somehow grapple with a massive paradigm shift potential, which probably we should have been engaged in a long time ago to remain relevant. What I want to just finish by saying is that perhaps what museums might want to do is rather than try to sort of entrain the entire institution in this 250 thinking, is let the day-to-day operations continue, as it were, over here, but start to create a sort of a vanguard operation comprised of board members, trustees, and some future-orientated, more future-curious members of staff who could start to go off to the side and start to think and develop sort of position papers that are starting to redefine what the given institution can become. It's not for everybody, and it probably can't feasibly involve everybody, but it sure could usefully involve a vanguard group that could report back to the main institution and to the whole board, and over the next couple of years, whether it's 250 related or just the future in general, start to really engage in what the institution might want to become in order to deal with change factors going on in its life.
Great. Heather, any comments?
I was just going to add, I think futures thinking is really important in this time, right? We're living in a period of change. Two institutes that I really like, I don't know the Adelaide one, I'm not familiar with, so I would like that link as well. But the Institute for Future Thinking and AAM has the Center for the Future of Museums. Both of those have really good resources if you want to engage in future thinking activities. Jane McGonigal is also phenomenal. If you've not read any of her materials or seen her TED Talks, she's a phenomenal scholar who spends a lot of time talking about how to think about the futures and model for them and plan accordingly. And so as you're thinking about future planning, those are great resources.
Great. Thank you for the comment, Emlyn, and for the response, Heather. We're nearing the end of the hour, but two people dropped quickies, or what I hope were quickies into the mix. Whitney Owen asked, "Where's your funding coming from, and how much budget do you have?" It's always the critical question. And Delta Mello asked whether you're making any use of AI in the project.
So as far as funding, we our seed funding, if you look at the site, we were generously funded by Jane Batten. You can see that across the bottom of the site. It was a donor gift to fund the initial portions of the site, and we're currently in active fundraising to fund future iterations. But again, no federal funding coming to ours. The site, it's all donor funded at this point. And then as far as AI, we have not used AI on the site at all. We are working on how we might be able to incorporate it into our editing process to where it could do initial fact checking runs, but we're never going to cede control of anything we do on the site to AI. Everything will be initially drafted by a human, reviewed by a human, in part because one of the things our teachers have told us is if it's AI generated, they can't use it in their classrooms because their districts don't allow it. And so we are very mindful of thinking about ways that AI can streamline our processes because we are a small, scrappy team, but we're not using it to generate content for the site.
Great.
And whenever we do, we will own it on the site. Like we will put some sort of a statement on the site, like this is how this has been used. But at this point, we're not using it for anything that ends up on the site, so it's not there.
Addie, you had a wonderful question, which I think would be a great wrap-up question since it concerns our primary audience, not just the teachers, but the students.
Yeah, thanks, Avi. thank you so much, Heather. This is super interesting. Side note, I just went to Colonial Williamsburg for the first time and it's my favorite place now. So
I
it was
love that.
lovely to hear you speak about this. I'm curious, I realize your initial audience or your primary audience is teachers, but then you talked about sort of student reach goals. And I'm wondering how you're planning to sort of measure that secondary audience in terms of reach.
Yeah, so there's a couple ways we can measure it. The one thing we've been pretty adamant about, like we don't want student accounts. We don't want to create student accounts. We don't want that legal, all the things that come with it. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't even know how to say it, but it comes with a lot of legal stipulations, particularly as you look at a global site. So we've never talked about having student accounts, but the way that we've adjusted the customizer. So when teachers customize a page for delivery in their classrooms, it essentially creates a hyperlink that can be traced to the number of uses. We don't know who's using it, but you can assume if a teacher creates it and there's 150 uses, those 150 uses were their students. So there is some, there's some squishy science in it, right? But the reality is we know how many teachers are in the country. We know how many students are in the country, and we can see on the back end for every page it's accessed, what country is accessing it, and how many people have looked at it. And so we will be able to make assumptions. If we hit 50 million in a year, obviously we're doing really well with the student population because there aren't that many teachers. And so some of it is squishy, but the reality is we're going to be looking at metrics as far as like how many times was it accessed, how long were the videos watched, the types of metrics you would collect on anything. We're just going to be able to extrapolate from that roughly how many people we think are teachers and students that are using the site.
Heather, thank you very much. And Addie, thank you for the question. We're running to the end of the hour. Again, if you want to be added to our email list, please put your name and email address into the chat. We'll be happy to add you to our list and send direct notices of future sessions. I want to reflect briefly, and that is that not only is the subject history, but the process is history. History is a process of dialogue, of conversation, and of revision. So your terminology of partnership and iteration are absolutely apropos the subject matter. Here we have a perfect alignment of content and form and process. I think that is really makes it one of its great strengths. And I wasn't kidding about every museum being a history museum, by the way. Um, I think that we need to accept the fact that the work is not going to end at the conclusion of the calendar year 2026. The work is ongoing. The process of creating national narratives has been going on since 1776, if not before, and it continues into the future. This is especially so if we want to create authentic, complex storylines with a range of voices bumping into each other in the narrative itself. And I think that this is one of the most wonderful projects. For a long time, I thought that we were going to have to settle for Ken Burns's television series and for the wonderful new Rick Atkinson trilogy on the American Revolution, which focuses primarily on the military aspects of the war. And now I believe that history.org has given us another invaluable resource for the future. So kudos to you. Thank you all for joining us today. Special thanks to Heather for presenting and informing us about the possibilities of partnering and working together for better stories. Happy New Year. I hope it's a
Thank you all.
healthy, healing, productive, and joyous New Year for all.
Thank you for the great session.
To everyone.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Take care. Heather, thank you.
Yeah, happy to. Thank you for having me. It's always fun to talk about this. Like, we get so buried in the work sometimes. It's like it's nice to get to talk about it.
Well, but the very idea of having the opportunity to even talk with one's colleagues is, I mean,
Yeah.
that's a rare thing already and very valuable for everybody.
Heather, did you drop your email? Is your contact in the chat somewhere?
I did not, but I can. I didn't even think about that.
I
But
would love
can
that
put
right
it
before we sign
there
off.
right now. There you go.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Excellent session.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Take care. Heather, I'll run back with you by email later today with a link to the recording, and which will also provide a link to the chat. So you'll be in a good position.
Can you also, Avi, send me the count of like the highest count of people who were participating?
Yeah, my ceiling is 100, and we hit 100 at 12:33.
Oh, awesome.
Actually, there were half a dozen or more people who tried to get on after we had filled our quota and who were turned away. So, that happens.
Got it.
I'm always wondering about whether I ought to